It's Shop Your Stash summer, so how did I end up buying so many stencils? I've definitely shopped my stash this summer, but clearly I also shopped in real life. To celebrate the summer of stencils, I thought it would be fun to make a series of videos highlighting different types, sizes, and uses. Today, I'm showing ideas for getting more from a set of geometric layering stencils. Here's my color combination. These are all Catherine Pooler colors, and they're all from the Spa line, so they're a little less saturated and a little more earthy. I'm using my Waffle Flower Media Mat, so I can use the 6x6 inch piece of cardstock and line up all the layers properly by using the corner. I'm using a Tailored Expression stencil set called Quilted. When I get a new stencil set like this, I like to use a Sharpie to number the layers. It's much easier than trying to read the etched name and number every time, and it even helps to make sure I've got them right side up. I've got 5 colors of ink, but only 4 layers, but that's okay, because the first way to get more from a layered stencil set is to use more than one color on each layer. All of my colors today have an analogous color in the mix. Analogous just means they're next to each other on the color wheel. And so, for example, here I used the Sparkling Berry, which is a pink, on each of the shapes, and then I went back in with Verbena, which is purple. These will mix together and give an overall look of pink with darker and lighter areas. See? Next, I used Sauna, which is a rich yellow, all over the layer 2 shapes, and then went back with Ginger, which is a darker oranger yellow. See how easy it is to get the look of one color, but with a little more interest. For layer 3, I started with Hot Tub, which is a pale greeny aqua, and then I went over it with Eucalyptus, which is quite a deep yellow green. I was surprised by how much I like this combination, and I'm definitely going to remember to use it again. For layer 4, I debated between the Sauna and the berry, but I figured that would give me more orange. Or I could use the Eucalyptus with the Sauna, which will give me a warmer green than the last combination. This time I cleaned off the stencil before going in with the Sauna, so I didn't contaminate my yellow ink pad with the darker green ink. And there it is. That's super pretty on its own. And see how easy it was to bring that quilty pattern to life rather than just flat colors. But I felt like there was a lot of contrast between the colors and the white background, so I thought about how to tone that down a bit. Here's what I came up with. I found a square die in my collection that just about fits the diamond or square around each of the flower shapes, and I cut it from 4 post-it notes. I cut them all at once. They're so thin that there's no trouble doing that. Normally I would use full sticky back sticky notes for this, but the ones I have are all quite dark in color, and that makes it difficult to place them properly. These ones are slightly easier to see through, so I can get that square placed properly before blending a very light coating of the lighter ink I used on the flower over the square. I hope you can see what I mean. There were a couple or maybe even a few times where I didn't get that square exactly centered over the design, but I just kept going. Often these little mistakes end up not being very visible. I like how the slightly smaller squares of color leave a white line around them, so it feels like it's part of the intended design. I also like how I got some overlap of colors in the corners of each square. I moved the cardstock so I could go over the edges when I needed to, and in the end, I was worried that eucalyptus would be too dark for the background of those flowers, but the idea of using the Sauna just didn't seem right, so I was very careful to be very light with my blending there. I trimmed this panel down to a square, and I maybe didn't think my positioning through very well since there's only one pink flower and it's right in the middle, which is where I would normally want to put my sentiment. But first, I decided to use the stitch detail on my square die cut to help me create a faux mat with some more masking. I used some post-it tape and I masked right along the stitching before adding a heavy coat of eucalyptus along the edge. I moved the tape and blended, and then I did that 2 more times until all 4 of my edges were done. The inks are translucent, so you can still see a bit of the pattern under the eucalyptus ink, and I think that just adds even more interest. I like the definition that this adds to the edge of my panel, especially because I almost always use a white card base, but this step is completely optional if you prefer an airier look. To finish this card, I spritzed it with shimmer spray and I added a small Mama Elephant sentiment that was backed onto a circle cut with a Stampin' Up! Circle die that has a fun edge detail. That circle was blended with the pink and purple inks. Maybe it looks a little out of place since there isn't any more pink, but I still like it. I also added some tiny gold embellishments that I make with a memory box cover plate die and some honey gold cardstock. I had more of that quilted panel, so I used a strip of it to make another card. I added it onto a white strip and I added an LDRS Thanks sentiment die cut. Originally I blended eucalyptus ink onto it, but I felt like it needed more contrast, so I added a heavy coat of macchiato ink to make it more brown. My background panel is also inked with eucalyptus ink as well as the macchiato, and also spritzed with shimmer spray so that it is a little lighter, but it still matches the sentiment. One of the things I love about ink blending is that you're not limited to the colors of inks you have. You can always change the tone of your inks, and that leads us to the final card. One thing you might not think to do with a layering stencil set like this is to make a monochrome card, right? I mean, the whole point of these stencils is that it's easy to use multiple colors without having to mask. But I think this quilted pattern will make for a great Christmas card all in red. But once again, monochrome doesn't have to mean boring. Instead of using red ink, I used Concord & Ninth Winterberry, which is really quite a pinky red, along with Catherine Pooler's Terracotta, which is quite an orangey brown red. Sometimes I started with one, and sometimes I started with the other, before blending the second ink over part of each shape. So this really gives me 3 different reds. The pinky Winterberry, the brown-orange Terracotta, and then a really rich true red where they overlap. And then when I got to layer 4, I saw a square with a hole in the middle. A hole perfect for a sentiment. Now, I know you don't all make 4 1/4 inch square cards, so if you wanted to do this with an A2 card, I would put layer 4 in place and just fill in that bottom square with the inks, still leaving the center square open. I trimmed the panel, added the faux mat, and stamped my sentiment. And here's another way to customize your stencils. This doesn't even have to be a layering stencil. I took a tiny little snowflake stamp from the same Avery Elle set that the sentiment came from, and I stamped it in each little diamond. I took turns between the Winterberry and the Terracotta without cleaning the stamp, so they're all going to be pretty much matching the blending I did earlier. I added 4 around the sentiment as well, and then 3 little gold embellishments to finish it off. So there's a few good ideas for getting more from a layering stencil set. I hope you'll give them a try. In this video here, I'm diving deeper into that idea of creating new colors with what you already have. And in one of the card examples in that video, I did something I almost never do. Watch and leave me a comment letting me know what it was. I'll give you a hint. It's more about size than technique. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.